Test 1 2. Test 1 2. Testing 1 2 3. Testing 1 2 3.
Testing 3 2 1. Testing. Oh, sorry, Amy.
Test 3 2 1.
Good afternoon. It is Monday, October 23rd, 2023, and I will now call to order the Wayzata Public Schools special meeting. Will the clerk please call the roll?
Yes. Milan Sahoni,
Present.
Linda Cohen,
Here.
Heidi Cater,
Here.
Bonita Lucky, here. Cheryl Posey,
Here.
Sheila Pryor,
Here.
Chase Anderson,
Here.
Sarah Johansson.
Here. All right, welcome everyone. We have a quorum, and there is just one item on our agenda for this evening, and it's under, first, we have to do an approval of the agenda and the consent agenda items, which is just one. Remember that, and we have no consent agenda items, so I will ask for a approval of the agenda, which contains one item under administrative reports and recommendations and the school start times. Is there a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved. Second.
All in favor of approving this agenda, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. Okay, now we have an agenda and one item on our agenda, and I will turn it over to Dr. Anderson.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the board. So as has just been explained, we have one agenda item on our special board meeting tonight. The board likely will recall that at our last meeting, we had a pretty comprehensive presentation about our middle school program as well as this recommended set of school start and end times for the 24-25 school year. We'd indicated at the work session this month that we would be bringing this agenda item back likely at a special meeting on October 23rd, which is today. So here we are with this special board meeting agenda item, and I'd like to share a little bit of background that's included within the board packet and materials that you've had access to. The recommended changes to school start and end times for the 24-25 school year were presented and discussed, as I'd indicated, at the October 9th, 2023 regular school board meeting. As discussed at this meeting, the school start and end time recommendations will accomplish the following. It allows for closer alignment of instructional minutes at the elementary and secondary levels that will impact the number of planning days needed at the elementary level. Increases instructional time for middle school and high school students, allows for more flexible scheduling for the 3 middle schools and the high school to accommodate any potential modifications to scheduling models and patterns, and it ensures a larger amount of accumulated time for the middle schools and high school during the school year to minimize the possible impact of inclement weather days, i.e. snow days, and needing to add school days back to the calendar if school would need to be canceled during the winter months. And we all know that we've had some years where there have been a number of days that we've needed to be out of session, and it always gets really tight with the middle school and high school. So that's an additional reason that these modified start and end times would be helpful. These have been reviewed by our transportation team professionals, and we've been assured that this plan can be implemented in a cost-neutral manner. And the elementary start and end times are not impacted by this recommendation. It would only be middle school and high school. Just as a reminder, we added 5 minutes to the high school calendar for the current school year. They had a start time of 8:20, that moved to 8:15, and they kept the same end time. And the recommendation, as it indicated, is to leave the current 9 elementary schools with the start and end times that are in place for the current year and have been for quite some time, and to modify the high school, keeping the 8:15 start time that we implemented this year and extending dismissal time to that 3:20 time from its current 3:10. So that would be an addition of 10 minutes actually at the high school for the coming year. And for the middle schools, the modification would be from a start time of 9:10 to 9:05, with an end time changing from 4 o'clock to 4:10, so adding 10 minutes on to the end of the school day for middle schools and 5 minutes at the beginning of the day. And the recommended action is to approve the recommended school start and end times for the 24-25 school year as presented in your board packet. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Anderson. Board colleagues, the recommended action is to approve the recommended school times as just detailed by Dr. Anderson. effective in the 24-25 school year. We'll do a motion in a second and then some discussion. So is there a motion to that effect?
I so, so move.
I second, Madam Chair.
Been moved by Linda and seconded by Milland. Okay, now is there some discussion? Milland.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I do understand that this is something that we vote on only for the time extension, not for the schedule change. But like many phenomenon, there is a cause and effect that we have to look at. And I believe that the effect is from the cause of the middle school schedule change, and that change requires us to change the time, and that's the effect. So having said that, I wanted to point out certain benefits that I see from this, not to regurgitate everything that Dana Miller and her associates said in the last couple of meetings. But what I also see, in addition to what they've said, is that this actually will lead to equity. Children who cannot afford outside resources, or even within the home resources, they get an additional 10 to 15, 20 minutes, and that adds an extra 47 hours of extra class time in the school for them to learn and study. It also includes additional time for math and language arts, and I think this will be very useful when we look at the achievement gaps. Hopefully they will reduce the achievement gaps because of that. For those concerned with the family time loss, I think what this process will do is give teachers the freedom to revisit the schedule and maybe hopefully intervene during the class time, and maybe some of them can even do their homework in school. That will free up their time at home. So I see a lot of benefits. I do understand that this will also come with a price, with the reduction in staffing. And that's something we have already looked at in the cost containment. So overall, I think this is a good thing for us to look at, and I therefore will support this resolution. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Heidi.
So I struggled a little bit with this one. And I'm talking to my board colleagues here, and it's because I'm super supportive of all the work that's being done around the middle school model and the changes and the need for updates and all of that. But the reason I'm struggling is because I think it came quickly to a certain extent, and I think we have to expedite a little bit because of other processes that are happening. And so I'm wondering, Nate, I know we chatted a bit, and if you could kind of give some background as to, because my thought was, if we could give this a couple more weeks, would that help to allow teachers to internalize some of the changes that are happening? And you had some really good feedback for me, and I was hoping you could give that.
Well, thank you, Heidi. I think it's important to recognize a couple of items as we go through the process. Number one, as we consider delaying, I think it's important to recognize we actually have pushed back what we normally would have asked for a vote for this time by 2 weeks already. So any additional delay continues to have an impact on teacher planning and professional learning and professional development time as we talk about the shift to a block model and block schedule. So principals want to be able to plan accordingly with their staffs. It also starts to push back registration, because with the model shift, there's waiting, because again, as I shared with you, nothing's a done deal until it's a done deal. And the principals are in a holding pattern right now, and they're waiting for the board to bring clarity to the decision one way or another to be able to move forward. So as the principals want to be able to move forward, that impacts class proposals and registration. So as we continue to push out registration, that would then impact staffing. So all of those components continue to get pushed out, and what might seem like, well, it's October, we should have that time to begin and pause some of those things now. Middle school and high school and those secondary schedules, all of that work begins now as we plan for next year. So any delay actually could have a significant impact come springtime in staffing, registration, and professional learning and development time for those individuals. So.
Thank you.
Sheila.
As the schedule change relates to the changes at the middle school, I've heard a lot of positive feedback. I myself think that it'll be very beneficial for the students. overall. And I expressed some concerns at a previous meeting that, the later end time for the middle school, that families would feel that. And I do have 2 middle schoolers, and I know they do get home late. It will be 10 minutes later in the afternoons. In the mornings, I don't think we will feel much difference because they're already arriving at the school very early and they're waiting, in the classrooms for school to start anyway. So from what it will feel like to families, it's 10 more minutes, and I'm acknowledging that, but I also think that the benefits to the students are far outweigh that. And as Millen pointed out, it might, there will be some families that may actually appreciate having their children in school for that extra time. So I too will be supporting this.
Thank you. Benita?
Dr. Flansburgh, I know that when the report was given before, we had some commentary and information from the principals. Have you received any feedback from teachers and how they feel about any of the time adjustments?
Well, I think we have a wide variety of feelings regarding any time there's change, because change can be a very difficult process, no matter what it is. As I chatted with one principal today, he had a number of staff members that he felt were very excited about the opportunity. There are others who, on the other side of the spectrum, in full honesty, I think there's just the fear of the unknown, and there's a change that comes with that process. As teachers will be having a significant voice moving forward with the rest of the work as we talk about the learning that needs to take place and the course proposals, because a big shift with this is to be able to add additional electives to the middle school. Remember when we talked about what are the pieces that we couldn't do if we kept the current model with cost containment, teaming would go away as we currently know it. We didn't have an opportunity to be able to implement the health and shift moving that away from Phi-Ed in the same way. And there's new MDE requirements surrounding arts, and we wouldn't be able to implement those the same way. So change was coming regardless because of some of those new requirements and some of those pieces that we were shifting. And it's also important to recognize the middle school review played a significant impact on this. The timeline was expedited because of our cost containment, but those changes were coming one way or the other.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Cheryl?
Just a quick question. The duration that's listed here for the elementary schools and then the secondary schools is not equal, and I'm assuming that's because passing time is included in the 7 hours and 5 minutes, and so then when you take out the passing time, then you get a more equal instruction time with the elementary schools, which is one of the main things that we're trying to balance out, is the amount of instructional time at the elementary level as well as the secondary level. Correct? Am I correct in that? Just looking.
Yes, and it's the difference in prep times. So when you're looking at the teaming time that they have built into the day in the secondary schedule, the elementary does not have that. So there's more instructional time with students from the teacher at that point than there is at the secondary. Okay. That's where you're seeing those differences. And passing time does play a small part.
Okay, thank you.
Linda?
Thank you. I think one of the things that's really important is one of the pillars, it seems to me, of the middle school is having teams so that students and teachers can really get to know each other well. And this schedule, this proposal, and changing this time allows us to keep one of the things that is most important to me, in my perspective, to the middle school, the teaming.
Thank you. Heidi?
Just one last comment, and you said something, Dr. Flansburgh, that really rang true to me, is that the teachers are going to have a lot of voice coming up as soon as we are able to make this decision and kind of firm up the parameters. There's going to be a lot of teacher voice involved in this. So,
And I think the example that Dr. Anderson has given that I like to use is right now we have the frame of the house. And there's a whole lot of work that needs to be done on the inside of that house yet, from the sheetrocking, the mudding, the taping, and the painting. And there's a lot of requirements that the principals are ready to move forward with their teachers and being able to get their voice into that process as it pertains to the course proposals and a lot of modifications that could still need to be worked out.
Other comments? I'll just briefly add, I think this is really exciting, and I think Dr. Sahoni started us off in a grounding of thinking about instructional minutes for our kiddos and opportunities for learning, and just an underscore that our programming and processes are really grounded in exceptional opportunities for our students. And I think that really rings true in this proposal. At the same time, it's complicated. It's change that is hard in a model that has not seen drastic change in over 20 years. It's sped up and made uncomfortable by the fact that there is a level of cost containment that is part of this process, which is increasing our timelines. And that's making it feel like, and we're doing really incredible work in planning, and we've done incredible work in framing the house, but there's a lot more to do, and we don't know what that is, right? And so our teachers are feeling in the middle of this work that they're doing every day to ensure quality experiences, that there's also a lot of change happening, and it's hard to get your feet around it because there's so many moving parts. And so I guess my only comment to say is, well, that was a lot of comments, but I want to thank our teachers for sticking with us. And for those that are a little unsure, I ask for our trust, and I ask for trust in our administration, because I do think we are aligned in our mission and and our strategic directions. And I want to thank our community for also engaging in this and asking questions. And so we do this kind of stuff together. We all are really grounded in kids, and I appreciate the board's support in helping to get some of those pillars concreted up and framed up, so now we know exactly what we're working with. So thank you to everyone for that. More discussion. Hearing none, it's a roll call vote.
Bonita Lucky. Yes. Cheryl Posey.
Yes.
Milan Sahoni.
Yes.
Linda Cohen.
Yes.
Sheila Pryor.
Yes.
Heidi Cater.
Yes.
Sarah Johansson.
Yes. Okay, thank you so much. That was the only item on this board meeting agenda for this afternoon. I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved. A second?
It's been moved by Cheryl and seconded by Heidi. The time is 4:20. All in favor of adjourning this meeting, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. Motion carries. We are adjourned. We will turn off our mics and offer a few minutes of transition as we move to our work session. Good afternoon. It is Monday, October 23rd, 2023, and I will now call to order the Board of Education or School Board work session. And as we typically do in work sessions, we'll go around and do introductions, and I will start to my right.
Bonita Lucky.
Cheryl Polzine.
Milind Sohoni.
Sheila Pryor. Heidi Cater.
Linda Cohen.
Chase Anderson.
Okay, and I am Sarah Johansson, and we are all here and accounted for. We have a really fun work session agenda today that will begin with some superintendent reports and some updates from the board about some of the work that's been done. And so I think I start off by turning it over to Dr. Flansburgh, or Dr. Flansburgh, why don't you come join us?
Well, thank you, Madam Chair, Dr. Anderson, and members of the board. I wanted to be able to take an opportunity to kind of knock off a little bit of the rust that we have been doing over the past 2+ years regarding the Center for Educational Leadership and the partnership that we have had with the University of Washington and now the University of Minnesota as it pertains to really the instructional improvement and the school experience that we're really focusing on across our system. And it leads to a lot of the work that we're doing. I think it's important to recognize and begin with some grounding work, some foundational background, and why are we focused on this work? And it's really based on over 2 decades of research coming out of the Wallace Foundation, being able to talk about the impact of the principal and the influence that they have in instructional outcomes in their building. So when we think of the work that the principal does, it can be all-encompassing. And we also know the #1 influence in student gains is always and has always been the teacher that's in front of the students. The #2 influence is the principal. And it actually is far closer than people recognize when they do the research, because the influence of the principal isn't just a singular classroom, it's the entire building. So the study was, again, across 6 rigorous studies estimating the principal's effect using panel data, principal's contributions to student achievement, and they were nearly as large as the average effects of teachers identified in similar studies. This just says that same thing, going back to, again, they're larger in scope because they oversee an entire building. Then to be able to share really the metrics and go, what does that mean? So when they talk about in that first bullet point, 1 standard deviation increase in the principal's effectiveness, they increase a typical student's achievement by 0.13 in math and 0.09 in reading. Well, let's break it down. That comes down to 2.9 months of additional math learning and 2.7 months of additional reading each year when you compare a top quartile principal to a bottom quartile principal. So that's the comparison. So to be clear, it's not just top quartile versus everybody else. They're saying, what's the difference between really high impact leaders in the building? The reason I highlight that in green every year, you start looking at an elementary school. And if you have a top quartile principal, instructionally, students could gain up to 2 years of additional learning in 6 years' time compared to their peers nationwide. Going through middle school, it's another year. Going through high school, it's another year. So the difference between top quartile principals could mean an additional 4 years worth of additional learning in the classroom. And when we say this is why this is our leverage point, the impact is enormous. I also added another one when I went back and was looking at the research again. And that third bullet point, the effects of this is in replacement. So when they're comparing the high leverage principal and their instructional leadership to the impact on intervention supports, math intervention supports and reading intervention supports. The effects of this replacement in math would be larger than more than 2/3 of the educational interventions compiled in recent review, and the effect in reading would be larger than about half. So think about that for a moment. During cost containment, when we're having to make really difficult decisions, and we've had to make hard choices about intervention supports, we continue to really support our principals and their development to be able to better their systems, because the research shows that the better the principal is, the better the tier 1 impact can be in the classroom as well, making up for some of those losses that we experience with math and reading interventions when they're not available. Really being able to hone in on, say, what drives the principal's contributions. So it begins with being able to say, what are they doing to engage instructionally focused interactions with teachers? That's the highlight. I mean, we need to be able to begin and say, our principals are instructional leaders. They are not managers. They lead through instruction with everything that they're doing. And we're going to highlight about our continuous cycle of improvement a little bit later on, but that's the key point. Number 2, they build a productive school climate. When you walk in, people are excited to be there. That's going to tie into our strategic directions later on as well. Facilitating productive collaboration in professional learning communities. You've heard Executive Director Dana Miller come up and speak countless times to the work that teaching and learning and the principals and the buildings are doing regarding the support of PLCs in each of our sites. And that's a heavy emphasis across the system. And then managing personnel and resources strategically. Are we putting people not only on the, are we getting the right people on the bus? Are we putting them in the right seats on the bus? Again, another quote from the research, principals really matter. It's difficult to envision an investment with a higher ceiling on its potential return than a successful effort to improve principal leadership. The timeline that we've been working on the last few years, back in 21-22, our SLT members, a number of us, went through what was called the Principal Support Academy, and being able to start to think about how do we envision supervising and engaging and supporting principals differently. Obviously, since principals report directly to me, my interactions with them have changed year after year after year as we've gone further into our work around the Instructional Leadership Academy. And I'm going to be spending a significant amount of time tonight really highlighting what the principal goal setting looks like, how that's changed, and what do those monthly check-ins look like, and how are they different than historical check-ins in many situations. That first year, we had 3 lead principals go through the Instructional Leadership Academy, 1 elementary, 1 middle school, and 1 high school principal. Last year, we had 10 lead principals and 2 associate principals from the high school go through. And I forgot to add on there, we also had Dana Miller and our 2 directors, Abby and Austin, from Teaching and Learning go through the Instructional Leadership Academy as well. So we want to make sure that Teaching and Learning knows and understands the work that the principals are partnering in. This year, we continue to have 2 lead principals, all of our associate principals finishing the Instructional Leadership Academy. And then we're doing what's called the 5D+. This is all of our administrators and supervisors. It's the 5 dimensions of teaching and learning that is really integrated into the Instructional Leadership Academy. But again, it's taking that feedback that we're asking our principals to do and really bringing it to the next level. What is it that they're looking at when they're going into classrooms? How can they observe non-judgmentally, really start picking out factually, not coming up with answers where they want teachers to be, but truly having wonderings that they have going into the room? What is it that they are questioning and they want authentic answers to versus where are they trying to guide a teacher to by their observations? We originally were thinking we were going to do Coaching Academy this year. It's been a very busy year, and there's a lot of professional development and professional learning on the plates of not only our principals, but many of our teachers as well. So we're going to hit pause on Coaching Academy, and we've shifted that to the fall of next year. But again, Coaching Academy is partnering with our principals, so they have an aspect in that, but it's again aligning it with so much with teaching and learning. So it's our literacy coaches, it's our peer coaches, it's a number of the individuals in teaching and learning to align what does that look like, so when anybody is going and providing feedback to a teacher, it's aligned in the system. It looks the same from building to building and from department to department. I throw up our roadmap, our strategic roadmap, intentionally because our new strategic directions really align exceptionally well with the work that we're going to be highlighting on. And really focusing on those first 2. When we talk about ensuring a high-quality daily experience for each and every student, you're going to see that coming through in a lot of the work that we're doing, and delivering high-quality instruction that leads to high academic achievement for all students. You're going to see that really coming through in a lot of the work. But again, when we talk about learning to improve from community engagement and strategic partnerships, a lot of times we think of community outreach, but I also would like to be able to point out a professional learning community is a community of learning. And so when we think about what's actually happening in our buildings, that strategic direction gets implemented in pretty heavily as well. You've seen this slide a number of times over the past 2 years. As a district, we have some district-wide priority work, focusing on the student experience, especially coming out of COVID. COVID knocked everybody, all educational institutions off their game, and it took a while to kind of regain our footing. As we do that, we recognize that the student experience is paramount to what's happening in our buildings. Focus on reducing academic disparities. You'll hear me say disparities versus gaps intentionally so, because you can always have a gap, no matter where you are. You could have somebody at the 99th percentile and the 91st percentile, and there's a gap. When we talk about disparities, it's what are we doing to ensure that all students reach a level of readiness where they are at a baseline that we say, you know what, you're ready when you leave Wayzata Public Schools to be able to achieve whatever you want to achieve. And there are minimums that the state would say, and they say, you know, we'll look at state standards, but we also have many students who come in and they're already beyond state standards. And we know that those students still deserve to grow a year's time in a year. And then students who aren't there yet, what are we doing to be able to close that gap of more than a year's growth during a year's time? And then again, focusing on the high quality instructional practices. This is our work in our partnership with leadership development for not only our principals, but you're going to see where the building instructional leadership teams really become embedded in a lot of this work as well. So again, focusing on the student experience ties in directly with our strategic direction number 1. What is our high quality daily experience for each and every student? Focusing on reducing academic disparities. That is our delivering on high quality instruction that leads to high academic achievement for all students. You've seen a couple of these as well. The focusing on high quality instructional practices, the 5 dimensions of teaching and learning, that is our work with the Center for Educational Leadership out at the University of Washington and the University of Minnesota. On the right-hand side, you've seen this as well through a number of the slides that have been presented around MTSS work and PLC work. This is John Hattie's visible learning research, and I put this up there so you can see how much the impact was on his research. 1,400 meta-analyses, 80,000 studies, and over 300 million students included in those studies. And he was able to develop and determine what are the really high-impact instructional strategies that we are doing, and you've heard us talk about those in the past as well, that get us to beyond that hinge point of 0.4. That's more than a year's growth in a year's time. That's the zone of desired effects. Our compelling why, we continue to be able to recognize what happens in our classroom and the student experience matters, and that the student experience does impact the student's ability to achieve at higher levels. You've also heard me say, one of my favorite TED Talks of all times is Rita Pearson when she talks about students don't learn from people they don't like. And that's why relationships matters. And in fact, Dr. Anderson has said countless times in the 2+ years that I've been here, he'll tell anybody coming in, if you can focus on one thing, if you're not always sure what to focus on relationships, because relationships matter. We've talked about what does this look like across the system. You've seen this image before. To improve instruction, it takes all of us engaging in the work of alignment, and that starts with the school board. What is the school board in alignment with the superintendent, with SLT, to lead the principals, the teachers, and students? That through line of instructional leadership matters. If any time any of those entities is not in alignment with everyone else, the system suffers. The work of the school board, you create the conditions for us administratively to do our work, to be able to lead exceptionally well. If there's confusion or there's the management, if the board were to ever go into management, it creates confusion within the system, and it makes the work harder to be able to do. This one I want to be able to credit our MTSS leadership team with. We were having a meeting one day, and I was on the whiteboard and drawing some things and kind of saying, here's what's in my head about continuous improvement. And I had in the center the work that we're doing around the Center for Educational Leadership for that desired daily student experience. And I talked about what a continuous cycle of improvement looks like. And Cassie Van Coverden started playing around in one of the apps online, and she goes, "Oh, I think I've got it. Here, let me throw this up on the board." And then we started having conversations a little bit further, and we said, well, you know, what really drives this is our strategic directions. And we started having further conversations about what are the individuals and who's impacted by those strategic directions. It's all of the entities within our district that are supporting the work that's happening in the buildings. And then recognizing there are also support systems in the buildings that are impacted by that continuous cycle of improvement as well. So when we think about the interconnectivity, the reason it was created as gears is they're interlocking. And when one moves well, all of them move well, and they're interconnected. I wanted to be able to lay out really important key dates. What does this look like over the course of the year? And taking that center cog and that center gear to be able to recognize it is a year-round process. A lot of times people think that the school year is 9 months, and you know, we begin in September and we end in May or early June, and you know, that's a school year. And for us who are here year-round, that's not where it begins and where it ends. Our work actually begins in June. We have the week after school lets out, we bring all of our administrators together. We take time to be able to recognize the end of the year, being able to summarize what just happened, and then say, what does that mean for where do we go next? So we set the stage in those moments. During the month of July and August, principals then take that information and they begin reviewing all of their site data from the previous year. And what they're being asked to do is look at those areas for where they want to be able to create more focus. Instead of just a holistic data component, because we can be data rich and information poor, it's being able to narrow that focus. Because we've talked about if everything's important, nothing's important. So where are we asking our principals to narrow that focus? We ask them to really narrow it down to 2 or 3 things. And then they bring that back to school in August to the Built Institute, and they meet with their building instructional leadership teams. And then as a group, they are able to share out what they noticed. And then they decide as a team, where do we want to go and where do we want to be able to move forward? Because teacher voice matters in that process as well. So then coming out of August in the Built Institute, there's workshop week where the Built teams and all of the building principals are really focusing on those goals with their buildings. And then we go around, when I say we, it's myself, Dr. Anderson, Dana Miller, Solveig Haraday, Jenny Nias, and even Corey Knutson, the WEA president, joins us on a number of those site visits. And we go and we hear what are the things that each of our buildings are working on, because they are asked to really have a very focused academic area and a student experience area that they've got for goals over the course of the year. So we do that, and then you're gonna see later on where my principal check-ins tie into those monthly check-ins. And then being able to talk about the January, February Built mid-year and principal mid-year check-ins to be able to just do kind of the check-in. How are things going and how do you know? We also talk about those school growth plans. They're living documents. They're not static. You don't create it at the beginning of the year. You don't put it on the shelf. It is something that is intended to be able to be living and adjusted after the monitoring of the student data goes through the year. What are we knowing? If we are halfway through the year and we've already hit our goal, well, what does that mean for the rest of the year? It doesn't mean that we're done. It means that we adjust the goal. If we're really struggling and need to be able to consider some other things and other metrics, it's a pause moment to be able to say, let's readjust and reconsider what do we need to be able to do differently. In May, we have the Built end of year, and then in June, the principal and all admin end of year. So I'm reflecting with the principals during all of those times about the work that's taking place in their buildings. The reason that there's a big shift going into this year is all of our lead principals, we do have 2 principals who are still going through ILA this year, but all of them have gone through that process now, and we're able to change what their goal setting looks like. We're going to get to that in just a moment. Again, the Center for Educational Leadership talks about getting better as a process, and our principals are being asked to think about deliberate feedback for teachers as they're going into their rooms. It's really shifting to a coaching mindset versus an evaluator's mindset. Our goal is to help teachers get better, and we want to be able to do that in partnership with them, and being able to really shift and think differently about what those conversations look like matters. I often will tell the principals, I've yet in my 25 plus years in education have seen written feedback truly move the needle for teacher feedback or principal feedback or any of us getting written feedback, but conversations matter. And those conversations that they're engaging in and thinking about what that looks like and how do we summarize it and tie it directly to the 5 dimensions of teaching and learning, that's key. And then really being able to focus on actionable next steps. So one of our principals, when they went through Instructional Leadership Academy, they came in and they were practicing and they had gone into a classroom and they said, I saw 9 different things I wanted to be able to provide feedback on. And I realized I can't do that because the teacher won't be able to handle 9 different things. They're going to try to do 9 different things at once. And then what it asks the principals to do is prioritize. Where do they want to begin? What's the one thing you want them to be able to focus on and create as the almost there? They're on the verge of, is how we describe it in the Center for Educational Leadership. They're right there and you can help them accomplish and get further along and give them feedback and partner with them through that process and then think on the next actionable step. So we get better as a process. One, you know, if you think about building any type of building, it's one block at a time. You build it from the foundation and the base up. This is where the principal goal setting tool really shifts. It's broken into 4 sections. Instead of being able to say, what's my goal at the beginning of the year, and then being able to really think about it and say, all right, let's go back and check in what your initial goal was, and at the end of the year, how did you do? It's an ongoing process, and this in and of itself is a cycle of continuous improvement as well. Because we're asking principals to look at the data, find trends, and then say, what is the impact of their leadership on changing instructional practices to be able to impact student learning in the building. So this is the top section. You're going to begin seeing the entire principal goal setting form coming through. And this is what it states at the very beginning. Principal goals support the theme of increasing achievement for each and every student. It's the role of the site administrator to effectively lead the staff in continuous improvement through refining the instructional model to create a laser-like focus on the instructional strategies that work and working with BILT and staff to ensure continuous student growth at all grade levels. Notice they do not do this in isolation. It is done in partnership. They are the leader of that building, but it is done through the collaboration and partnership of the work that's happening with all teachers in the building. This is the work, the phase 1, and you're going to see it in color-coded in green. This is what principals are asked to do over the summer months. So after the school year ends, they're able to collect all of their data, and now they start digging into it. Based on the analysis of that data, what is something that they have regarding concerns about student learning? What's the evidence? What are student strengths that they can build upon? You've heard us talk about asset framing in the past. This ties that into that work. And really being clear about what do we mean by asset framing. It doesn't mean that, you know, we can find somebody who would be doing something inaccurate and then saying, well, we're going to find that as a strength. It's everybody has something really positive that they bring into a classroom, and let's find that good. And then what can we build upon with those students? What's the specific student learning problem to be addressed by the cycle of inquiry, and why this one over others? Why are they prioritizing this work? And then they are asked, what would teaching practice look like and sound like if the student learning problem is effectively addressed? So if they want to impact the student learning, what can they do with the teachers in the classroom that they can support differently? When you think about the student learning problem, which teaching practices effectively address it? This goes back to John Hattie's work and being able to say what are the instructional strategies that we believe could be the largest impact strategies in our system. What concerns them the most, and what specific problem of teaching practice is there to be addressed in the cycle of inquiry, and why this one over others. That leads us into the start of the school year. So after we've gone around, we've met with all of the BILT teams and we've had the conversations, then I go around and I begin a conversation with the principals and we begin actually digging into their data. And we talk about what are they doing differently to be able to shift and change the work. So going back to that research that we looked at the very beginning with the Wallace Foundation, now it's about the impact of the principal. So what are we asking principals to do differently? What is it that if they think about the teaching problem of practice and student learning problem, which leadership practices effectively address it? What do they want to work on? So notice in any of these slides, there's never a blame on any one area. It's all recognizing we have areas for growth and improvement. And the principal, it's a really hard job, and their influence is monumental through this process. And again, just being able to start digging in and looking through those pieces. And that leads to what's called the theory of action. So if the principal, and then you state what it is that they want to be able to work on for their leadership skills and development, that they believe is the hinge point in their work with teachers, then teachers will be able to. So what are they going to do to be able to help teachers get better? So as students will be able to. And what is it that we're looking for growth? So that goes back to that data analysis that principals are being asked to review at the beginning of the year and during the course of the summer to be able to say, how does this all interconnect? Now, once the theory of action is established, then we kind of have finished the initial goal setting. Then we move, this is phase 2. So phase 1 is the, again, data analysis. Phase 2 is you're generating the theory of action. Leads us into phase 3. Oh, sorry, there's one more section. Phase 2 still also has what we would ask all of our students and teachers to do. What is their success criteria? So principals being able to pause and say, what's their current practice? What do they want it to look like? How are they going to measure it? And what supports are necessary for them to be able to accomplish those goals? Same thing with teaching. What's their current reality? What would success look like? How are they going to measure it? And what supports are necessary? All the way through students. So they're creating their success criteria rubric at the front end of the year, being able to say, here's what I think this should look like. Then we move into implementation and support, phase 3. These are my monthly check-ins with the principals. They're never gotcha moments, they're conversations. Just like we don't sit and I don't write everything out, and you'll see the next slide actually has guiding questions that we engage in, because it's not about a checklist and making sure that we've just checked the box and we can move on. We talk about what are the principals learning through their work and what are they struggling with, what's working well, where do they want to be able to continue to emphasize their leverage and their support for teacher learning. A lot of principals this year, because we implemented the building instructional leadership teams last year, they are talking about that's their hinge point right now, being able to continue to develop the teacher leaders in the built and being able to say, how can I support them in the PLC work that's happening? And then the PLC is really being tight to the Plan, Do, Study, Act cycle. So they're taking that information, and one principal I met with today said, I want to be able to really come and focus on studying the data, but then what do we do about it? For the kids who aren't there yet, what are we doing about it for the kids who have already accomplished it? And how can we meet those students and extend them beyond where they already are? So this is the ongoing work throughout the course of the year. The guiding questions, there's a lot of components, and I won't read all of this to you word by word, but I think the key is just recognizing, especially at the end, you know, what do we need to pay attention to, and what are the principal's next steps? So as they think about their work on a day-to-day basis, how are they getting into classrooms? How are they providing feedback? How are they leading with their build teams, their PLCs? How are they essentially, for lack of a better phrase, helping move the needle? How are they moving that to a greater improvement across the board? At the end of the year, once all of the school days are completed and they're able to catch their breath for a couple moments, then this leads back into June. And now they're analyzing their impact. What were the results of the school year? What changed in student learning? And what evidence is there that you can say, I saw this change? What's changed in the teaching practice? And what's the evidence? And then, what's their instructional leadership practices that have changed? And then what's the evidence that we've seen over the course of the year? So as we look at this, it's that big continuous cycle of improvement that we talked about right here. And we say, what drives our work? Well, it's really based on the strategic roadmap and our equity commitment. Because remember, our equity commitment is an extension of our strategic roadmap. They're integrated together, and that it really focuses on that, what is our desired daily student experience? Do we want to see students coming into our buildings, know that they're welcomed and cared for, that they have a sense of belonging, and that they can achieve success at high levels? That's our drivers. I highlight this one because we share this with teachers, and we shared this at the Built Institute as well, and you've seen this or may have heard about this as we go through. A lot of times in a lot of locations, they lead with curriculum. And what they say is, well, here's what the curriculum says. Today is day 1, so it will be lesson 1, and tomorrow is day 2, so we will be on lesson 2. And they hold so tightly to the curriculum that there isn't any variability for student learning and response to students and where they are in the process. Really, the curriculum is our core resource, and it's there to support the learning of the students. The students are not there to support the learning of the curriculum. So we begin with, do we have a vision for student experience? Asking the question, as a student walks in, do they belong here? That's our equity work. What is that vision for student learning? We want to be able to answer yes to, is this learning meaningful? Can I do this work? That leads into our instructional vision. That's the 5 dimensions of teaching and learning. The 5 dimensions in teaching and learning in and of themselves are not instructional strategies. That leads into the instructional strategies. It's being able to recognize what does high quality instruction look like, and now let's talk about what it actually is in each and every classroom. Then it comes to the curriculum. It's our essential standards work, our common assessments, and our core resources. So far, to start the school year, we have visited 14 of our 15 buildings, including ELS and transition. And we continue to have those discussions centered around the student experience goal. Again, ensuring a high quality daily experience for each and every student and delivering high quality instruction that leads to high academic achievement for all students that we're going through over the course of the year. So being able to, I've done a lot of talking at you and being able to kind of give the high flyover. But as you think about a lot of the work and a lot of the investment in not only professional development monies and time and commitment, where are we? Where have we been? And where do we continue to go? So we've made a lot of changes the last couple of years to be able to say we're going to become hyper-focused on an instructional improvement. We recognize that we are a really high-performing school district, and we can still get better. And recognizing that for a vast majority of our kids, what brought us here, we're not changing. And and I want to be able to really highlight that, because I think a lot of times people go, oh my goodness, we're changing everything. You don't leave the one who brought you to the dance. And in this case, it's that individual who, we're not changing what already made us a high-achieving school district. But we also recognize that high achieving isn't where everybody is. And so what are we doing to be able to not only keep our high students at really high levels, but to elevate the other students who are not there yet? When we talk about our equity work, it is not a zero-sum game. It does not mean lowering standards and/or expectations so others can achieve higher. It is ensuring that our high-quality instructional practices remain in place and that families, what we've become known for, that stays there, and we get better in other areas that we need to get better in. That's what this work is about, and that's a lot of the high-level overview. So with that, I'll open it up to questions.
Thank you, Dr. Flansburgh. Well, that was a lot and really incredible work. Board colleagues. Sheila.
So, as you know, I know a lot about literacy instruction. It's a passion of mine, and I recently had the pleasure of sitting through our community advisory committee for curriculum and technology, and we heard a lot about how the district is, coming into alignment with the READ Act. They were already on, going in the right direction and doing a lot of things, and everything that you said is in alignment with best practices that we hear from the University of Minnesota and MSBA in terms of the role of the principals and building community and coaching. So I will get to my question, don't worry. This is going to make meaningful change in our district. It's going to be, I fully support it. It is wonderful. And I'm wondering how, do you see the literacy aspect as part of this, and where does it fit in, or is it its own separate thing?
Oh, I would say it's absolutely embedded into this work. In fact, as we're going out to visit our building instructional leadership teams, I would say in particular at elementary, almost all of them are being able to focus in on literacy as their primary area of growth. And a lot of them will look at, so I'm going to take a step back too, because for years, we know that MDE has one major assessment that they give, the MCAs, the Minnesota Comprehensive Assessments. The comprehensive assessments are based on standards. They're not based on growth. They're based on minimal levels of proficiency for every grade level to be able to say what is our bare minimum. We also have a significant amount of our students who, on day one, they can walk through the doors and say, well, I've already achieved the grade level standards. What's next? We're not going to send them home and say, come back next year. That's where we talk about everybody still gets a year's growth in a year's time. Well, when we then start looking at students who aren't there yet, and we start talking about growth, the principals are shifting a lot of the growth measures, and they're looking at who is not making strong growth or they have significant concerns. So they start really drilling down and looking at individual students that haven't made that growth yet. And in particular, they're looking at literacy, being able to say, all right, in the area of literacy, who's not there and what are we doing in the classrooms instructionally to be able to support those students at higher levels to help them achieve beyond where they are already. Because again, for 75% of our kids, what we're doing works exceptionally well. It isn't overhauling what's already working for a vast majority of our kids. It's really narrowing in on who is it not working for and how can we get better in those areas.
Thank you.
I hope that answered it.
Helen?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Dr. Flansburgh, almost every time that you speak from that podium, from that seat there or anywhere else, you talk about equity not being a zero-sum game, and I hope you keep doing that. It's very important for the community to understand that equity is not a zero-sum game. We are not bringing these kids down to bring these kids up. I think that's very important. The question I have is about the collection of data and analysis, the green and all the other colors there that you had in the principal growth and development goals. How difficult is it for the principals of the elementary school to determine those versus middle school or high school? Because typically elementary school kids, maybe they're not as vocal, maybe.
Well, I think when we're looking at some of our standardized measures, we're shifting to multiple measures. And what we don't want to do is hang our hat on one assessment. And so the shift away from just the MCAs to be able to use FastBridge as another assessment. So we've got FastBridge Reading, FastBridge Math, but also common assessments. We're asking teachers to be able to focus on formative assessments within their classrooms. And so when you think about what a formative assessment measures, it's what have I taught and what have students learned? What do they know already coming in? Because you can give a unit assessment at the end and say, well, they mastered it. They might have had it mastered before they actually started the unit. And it's being able to do a pre-assessment and then being able to really pause and say, where's the learning that's taking place for all of our students? Again, when we think of our PLC work, the reason that PLCs are such an essential component within our work is teams can really break down and have a common understanding of what common success criteria is for every standard, and what are they doing for kids who don't know it yet, but who also already know it. I also think it's really important when we talk about equity, it's really unfortunate over the last number of years for many individuals, equity has become very politicized. And as a district, I'll tell you, it's not politicized here because we are very clear about it, what equity means for us. It's meeting the needs of each and every student and recognizing that when some students, and again, I go back to what's the daily student experience. When students come into our building, do they have a sense of belonging? Do they know that they're cared for and that others will, make sure that they have a place in the system? And are they also achieving at high levels of success? Because you can't have one without the other. They're braided together very, very tightly. We want to be able to see students who succeed daily lead to high academic achievement. Thank you, Dr.
Thank you.
Heidi?
I love this whole framework a lot because I think it's really easy to see how we're going to see really great impacts in our students and their high achievement. My question is, I see how you're talking about it and it feels really good because it's a way for principals to be able to coach up their teachers, right? And for teachers to also have a voice in what works and what doesn't work so that there's some real excellence around teaching in the district. And I think that's a really great way to also retain our teachers because then they become the experts. How does this stay away from being something that's like a performance review? Can you speak to that a little bit?
Absolutely. And again, it goes back to what does the feedback look like in shift two? So when I earlier talked about the 5D plus training that our administrators are going through, when I was a principal, it was probably the hardest thing that I did was having to change what my feedback looked like for teachers. It moved away from evaluation into shifting into conversation and questioning. The best example I can give you is I had one teacher who, had allowed me to essentially do my practicing of what that looked like and sounded like in her classroom. And we would be scheduled, I'd go into her room, and she and I would be scheduled to meet after the end of the day had finished, and then, being able to go back and forth with my noticings, my wonderings, my questions, and being able to think about her instructional practices. And she was coming into my office at lunch saying, I can't wait till the end of the day to have this conversation. I'd say, why? She goes, Nate, the moment you walk into my room, I'm already starting to think about what is Nate looking for. And then I start thinking about what are my instructional practices and what do I need to be doing. And all of a sudden I start thinking about kids differently. That's our goal. And I think it's realizing that change takes time. I think it's really important to recognize. I use the example on a scale of 1 to 10. If you're a 5, you can move to an 8 in relatively short order. In fact, you can do that in 2 to 3 years. And 2 to 3 years might seem like a long time for a lot of individuals, but it's not. In the realm of education, it's really fast. When you're an 8 and you're trying to move to a 9, well, that's 3 to 5 years in and of itself. When you're a 9 and you're trying to move to perfection, that's career incremental work. And that's continually chipping away, and that's making Michelangelo. And it's chipping away at that stone and trying to perfect it a little bit at a time. And I think it's really important, and while not everybody might feel that their experience is a 9, as a district, we're a 9. And it's recognizing that we do amazing things, and we're not there yet. And the reason that I say we're not there yet, I'll go back to the learning that we've done and do all the research. When you think about good to great, good is the enemy of great. And whenever we say we're good enough, then be prepared, because that's when the fall begins. We'll never say that we're good enough. It's continuous improvement, which goes back to that cycle. And it's not ever meant to look at it from a defeatist mindset either, because continuous improvement, our kids change every year. So it's just a new group of kids in front of us. And that's why it's impossible to say we'll ever arrive, because the kids are constantly turning over. But what are we doing to be able to better the system year after year after year? So as kids move up in our system, they can achieve at higher and greater levels. And when everybody comes out of high school and we're able to say that, their experience, because what happens in elementary does impact what happens at the high school, and we all know that, and what happens in middle school does impact what happens at the high school. So being able to create common pathways for all of those students is absolutely essential. And thinking about that on a way to recognize when principals go into a classroom, and now you start thinking and shifting away from evaluation, and we're going to be starting conversations about that in the future, is how do we move away from that evaluation mindset to one where it really becomes a conversational coaching, and there still is feedback, but it really is in more of a, how can I help you get better? Because in any field, take a look, I love sports, that's what happens. Coaches provide feedback to help their players get better and stay at their peak performance as best they can.
Cheryl.
Thank you. Just a follow-up to that and what you said. Do you have any feedback at all from the teachers that went, in that first cohort in 21, 22? Like, are they seeing where their relationship with the teachers in their building is different? It's not just a performance review. Do you have any feedback yet? I know I'm being impatient because, like you said, the timeline. This takes time, so I just wondered if you'd gotten any feedback from
I do, actually. I think about one elementary principal in particular, and I'll give one very concrete example. When she emailed me after she had gone through and was meeting with the teacher and started asking them very specific questions about the practices that they had, and the teacher came back and said, actually, I never would have changed my practice had we not engaged in this conversation. Because in the traditional way of doing their evaluations, it really felt more like the checkbox and being able to just kind of, I need to go through the hoops to be able to do a traditional evaluation. And so they started thinking about student learning differently. I know, again, I'll go back to that next actionable step. So when you think about what principals and they're going into a classroom, if they're pausing to slow down and thinking about, oh my goodness, there's 9 different things I want a teacher to work on, but I need to focus on the next actionable step. What is this teacher on the verge of being able to do really well, and how can I help them accomplish that now so that I can get them to what's on the verge of next and help them accomplish that. So I think that we have started hearing about it from principals. I was just doing one goal setting with a principal, and they shared the form. I'll give 2 examples. One of them looked at me and said, Nate, when you shared this out, I looked at it and went, what in the world is he thinking? And then all of a sudden I started seeing how this is all interconnected. And now it makes sense. Another one came in their goal setting, just shared with me and just said, I love this because this is helping me stay focused on what it is I need to do versus getting distracted. And we know our world is busy and things are coming at us 100 miles an hour at all times. And how can we help our principals stay focused on what the most important thing is?
Sheila.
I thought of another question. I was wondering, with all of the PLCs and the, communities, are there opportunities for teachers of higher grades to, as you evaluate what works and what's going well and maybe what's not, could a teacher in middle school say, I'm seeing a lot of students who, aren't doing well with spelling, and then how is there somewhere before I get them that this could be something that we would work on? So I guess between grades, is there opportunity to kind of provide feedback?
So I think you've got a couple of questions there. And one, it's always important for a teacher to know not only what's being taught in the grade level below, but what's being taught in the grade level above. So they need to know where students are coming from and where students are going to. So I think that's part of the continuum of learning that teachers need to be well equipped at. Teaching is, and what the Center for Educational Leadership will say, it's an exceptionally complex endeavor. It is not easy work. It's never been easy work. It will always be really impactful work. And that's why we look at it and we say there's no other career like it in the world, because we're shaping tomorrow's leaders today. When you think about the other components of what are we learning and seeing, I think one example, Dana Miller and her team put together a lot of data for the principals to begin actually unpacking, very similar to what you're describing, and then taking and saying, what are they noticing based on student outcomes, and where is mastery? Where are we seeing the strands of mastery in some grade levels, but maybe not in other grade levels, or in some buildings and not other buildings, and being able to say, what can we do to learn from one another? And again, it's not to ever be able to highlight it and say, well, you're doing better and I'm doing worse. It's, what are you doing differently than I am? And having that level of vulnerability to learn from your colleagues. That's not easy. And one of the things that we talk about in John Hattie's work, there is something called micro-teaching, where teachers can be vulnerable enough when you record yourself and then have other people watch it and then you provide feedback. We're not there yet, but that's coming down the road.
I have a question. I'm gonna get kind of granular for a minute, because you've been talking about kind of globally the things that our principals are doing to to support our buildings and support our teachers, and that this is really, really long-term work. And my granular, I don't know if it's a fair question or not, but I really want to ask it, is we know that our teachers are facing a lot right now. We have larger class sizes. There's, we still recover, and we hear a lot about our teachers struggling and just having a lot on their plates. Can you tell us any specifics or any things around what does this investment in this work that we're doing from a long term, how is that being realized in the world that our teachers are living in today and tomorrow?
Well, it's a great question, and I'll answer it to the best of my ability. So when you're thinking about the PLC work, there's a lot that happens and there's a lot of learning. And no matter where you are in any learning implementation, there's something called the implementation dip. There's a learning curve. So learning is never linear at all times. When there's new learning, there's a point where there's a little bit of a flatlining and you might actually regress slightly as new learning is taking place. It's no different when students are experiencing new learning. And they might come home, I can think of my own daughter, and school came very easy for her for a long time, and then all of a sudden when it didn't, the frustrations and the challenges, and maybe even a couple tears along the way, and there was new learning. But when she learned it, she was stronger on the backside. Learning is hard. Change is hard. I'll give an example of PLCs that I've led up personally and being able to look at the difference. So I wouldn't be able to, without a couple principles here, to be able to give you the specifics and say, here's how I can define it for our teachers today. I can remember when we were implementing PLCs the first time through in my own building, and when teachers started really leaning in on one another and recognizing the work of partnership and collaboration in that sense, and being able to come back and say, what do we do for the students who need to extend it and aren't there yet? What we found was they would come to me and say, our balance in life and work has actually gotten better, but it didn't at first. And that's the hard part. So when you play the long game, there's the learning curve. And I think that's where a number of our PLCs are. And I think that as I chat with principals on a really regular basis, I'm hearing the feedback from them saying, these are really game-changing moments. And in particular, one of the principals had told me, Nate, the impact and the change that it's had on that individual and their leadership was pretty monumental in what they were doing with their instructional leadership team. It changed how they're interacting with teachers. It changed how they're leading their buildings and they're partnering and questioning things differently. And to be able to say it's going to lighten the load right out of the gate, it's probably not true. And I can't tell you that change is easy or it will make life easier. Down the road, I've watched it. I truly believe that it can bring about better balance. But I'll go back to my comment earlier about teaching as an exceptionally complex endeavor, and it's never been easy, and teaching probably never will be easy. And if we're looking for easy, then what we're doing is maybe choosing the wrong field. Because what we're wanting to be able to do is see all students achieve at really high levels. It's the difference of saying, you know what, I'm at 90%, I'm good, I can go home now. We're not looking at that. That's where that continuous cycle of improvement, and that's where the hard work is. And I have no doubt we have phenomenal teachers, we have phenomenal building leaders. And when we talk about sharing the load and that partnership and why the building instructional leadership team is so essential, because principals can't do this work by themselves. Teachers can't do this work by themselves. It all has to be done in partnership and collaboration. And the more that we can get individuals supporting one another and helping teachers lead this work up, the reason that we want BILTs to be professional leaders in their building and really lean into them and their development. It also, I'll use Solveig Heraday as an example. Solveig is amazing, and she's one person, and she can't serve 13 buildings all at the same time. So how can we take the work that Solveig is doing, supporting her in developing other teacher leaders at the building level to be able to support the implementation of those practices across the system? That's where the learning continues. Because if we just continue to say someone else needs to do this for me, and I'm not saying that that's what's happening, but that's, we can also then say it'll burn people out in the long run. Build capacity and we won't burn people out in the long run.
I just wanted to add on to what you said, because I absolutely agree with what you're saying. And that's also, too, in my mind, where the cultural dynamics come into play, that you now will begin to see cultural shifts for Wayzata. So when you think about the culture of Wayzata, it will not look the same, nor will it be the same, because people will not talk the same.
Thanks, Benita. All right. That was fantastic. Thank you.
Absolutely.
And you have something else.
I've got 2 more slides, and just to be able to recognize some of the continued shift and change that are coming. So we have, as we talked about earlier this year in our very first back to school PowerPoint, we talked about that e-learning was going to be utilized over the course of the year. And again, what is e-learning? It's emergency learning. And we're really talking about inclement weather or a very specific building situation that might require, if a building were to flood or something of that nature. So if you had those situations and you needed to be able to have e-learning days, this is something that was passed in the legislature that needs to now be doesn't have to be negotiated, but it has to be discussed, and being able to come to an agreement and an understanding of what does an e-learning plan constitute and how does this come out and play. So we are going to, if we have a snow day, for instance, this year, chances are, we have snow days every once in a while. The first one would be a traditional snow day. We go into it and say, have fun. Go play in the snow and enjoy a day off. The second day, we shift to e-learning with both K-5 and 6-12. And being able to recognize that there are very specific components that are associated with that e-learning. So this will be going out, you're going to see 2 plans that are going to be going out to all families. They've already been shared out with all teachers, and teachers are aware of these shifts and changes as well. So this will be forthcoming. It will look different, let's be very clear, in K through 2 versus 3 through 5, and it will look different 6 through 12, because the amount of time that we're asking kids to engage is developmental. So we would not ask a kindergartner to be accomplishing the same expectations as a 10th grader in what we want to see them get done over the course of the day. So this kind of lays out some clear expectations, and being able to recognize that teachers need to be available to answer calls or be available to check in with Zooms for kids. What we are not saying is that it is going to be going back to COVID instruction and kids will be online all day for 6 hours. That is not what this is. It's different, it's check-ins, it's more self-guided work, but it's also, as Dr. Anderson talked about earlier when we talk about snow days, it helps us not reach the level where we have to add makeup days onto a calendar in the future. We have had years where we've lost 7 days due to inclement weather, and then school districts had to add days and change the calendar and figure out where are we going to do this. That's not fun for anybody. We are allocated by the state legislature 5 e-learning days. So then day 1 would be a non-student day. The next 5 inclement or emergency weather related or event related days would be e-learning days. And then if you ever hit, so that brings you through day 6. And if you ever hit a day 7, the question is, can you get more e-learning days? You cannot. We have 5 and only 5. Then if you ever hit day 7, that would be back to a canceled day. Questions?
Millen.
Dr. Flansburgh, did you say 5 e-learning days, 2nd through 5th?
So it would be 5 e-learning days across all grade levels, including transition. So we'd be going kindergarten through transition students, but the first day would be a canceled school day. So e-learning would beginning on day 2. If there was a canceled day, the e-learning begins on the 2nd day, where it would be emergency
So
learning.
2nd, 3rd, 4th, and 5th.
And 6th. So 2nd through 6th. So days 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
Okay, I don't see the 6th on the schedule here.
I'll have to look at that again.
Yeah.
But it should be, so, oh, I see, the first day and then days 2 through 5. Thank you. Yep, it should be days 2nd through 6. We'll get that adjusted.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Heidi.
When I'm looking at the FAQs, so number 5 says, can families choose to opt out of e-learning days? What would that do to a student's record, or what would be the impact of them saying, no, we're not going to do this?
Well, there's no, I'm not going to do this. It is the required work. It's like when kids are given the work to be able to accomplish, it's, if I'm sick that day, we would ask parents to call their children in sick just like they would any other day. If they are unable to do the work, then it's a sick day, and then they have time to make that up. But to be able to say, well, I'm choosing not to do the work, remember the reason that it's different than what would be considered some of our flex learning days, where a lot of assignments were kind of standalone. These are really related to the work that's happening in the classroom already, and it's a continuation, so they're going to be missing out on a continuation of the work. And we've already pivoted with this in the past. The secondary can make this shift pretty easily. We've told our elementary principals, historically, we have not sent iPads home. We are saying that in 3 through 5, iPads can go home. And that's a shift this year.
So to just put a fine point on that, if a family chose not to do it, it would be a missing assignment, right?
Yes,
It would just
correct.
be, it would be just like they would be missing assignments or classwork just as they would if they were not at school.
It's a school day. It counts for us as a school day. We treat it as a school day. The assignments that would be given out are expected to be completed.
I guess I'll ask one question. So the first day, when you present it, maybe it's just my mind goes to, the first day's a fun snow day and we all drink our cocoa, we go to school the next day, and then, a few months later, then, and we plan and then it all goes. And it could be that the first day happens and then the second day happens right after the first day. And so are we making some preparations so that even on that first day, even though it's a snow day or whatever, I won't think about floods, I'll just think snow days, that will hopefully send our students home with devices and try to be prepared just in case one turns into two?
That would be the goal, and that's why we're saying in 3 through 5 that those devices can go home.
Okay.
So it's recognizing that shift and being prepared. So we've chatted about that with principals to be able to say, work with your buildings and your staffs to be prepared for this. This will be going out to all families in the next couple of days. We want to make sure that all of our families are prepared because we do know that October can bring snow. We hope that it's not anytime soon, at least I hope that it's not anytime soon, but we would rather have all of our families prepared, all of our staff prepared, and the same thing, if you have a day that's canceled, being able to tell staff, be prepared and think about if there is a day 2, what will that look like?
Heidi?
I have one more question as it relates to teachers. Has this already been built in? Is this already something that they know about? Is it included in their contracts? All of that, has it been considered?
Yes, and I actually, excuse me, might defer to Stacy Voss to be able to speak about what the negotiation components of that looked like and sounded like.
Okay, good evening. Yes, we did discuss this during negotiations. It wasn't something that we added into the contract, but it was something that we agreed upon as a practice. And so the WEA is accepting of the plan that you see before you. You're welcome.
So one question and one piece of bad news. The first question, does this require any additional board action? You're bringing this to us. It's come to teachers. It's come to whatever. So
It's an FYI only.
This is an information sharing process. Okay, that is good to know. And because I didn't grow up in Minnesota, but I hear this all the time, it's super exciting that this year there's maybe a snow forecasted for Halloween. So our snow days are coming, and I just get excited about snow and Halloween in Minnesota. So they might be here sooner than we think. On that note,
Gee, thanks, Sarah.
you're welcome. We're in this together. Good thing we have a plan. All right. Anything else? Okay. Thank you, Dr. Flansburgh.
Hey, thank you.
This is fantastic. Sorry to end on that chilly note. Right now, it's gorgeous. We should have outside learning days this week. Okay. So the next item on our agenda is a follow-up. So we'll jump all the way down from teaching and learning, human resources, finance and operations to board reports. And this is, board colleagues, meant to be a conversation for us. One, you will all recall that as part of our superintendent evaluation process, it was requested that we consider a board self-evaluation process once again. So it's something that the board has done in the past. And then we've had a pandemic that's happened and interrupted some of our work, added to some changeover in board and things. And so here we are again. And so our process is that today, this afternoon, we're going to engage in a bit of a conversation about what the board is looking for a self-evaluation. And to provide any feedback. And then we will work to compile this information and then engage in the process. And so I did ask So I guess the questions that I might put on the table for us to entertain or talk about, and we'll take copious notes, is what are your individual goals for self-evaluation? So what are your goals? What would you like to accomplish from this self-evaluation process is a better way to say that. What do you think has worked for board development in the past, as well as what would you like to see moving forward? So that is the process for us to consider. And maybe we'll just put some information on the table, and then I will share some ideas about next steps. So again, what would you like to see happen in this self-evaluation? What do you think has worked for our board development process this year? So the work that we've done together in board development, and what would you like to see moving forward?
I can start.
Sure.
I think what's worked for me in the past is having something that we all read or have a goal to understand, and then starting the conversation from there, because then it feels a little bit more framed up, a little bit more bounded, so that there's more, I don't know, it's more effective that way in my perspective.
Okay. Other feedback? Linda?
I like the process that we use for I like the process that we use for the superintendent's evaluation, where maybe we have a few questions that make sense to the group, and we all answer those questions, and then they're compiled, and it's a basis for discussion. And I think the goal, it seems to me, would be, I think our board has functioned pretty well. I think there's always room for improvement, and I think this, because there will be several members of the board who are new, that they could learn from some of the things that we have to say.
Okay. Millen?
Yeah, I agree totally with Linda about having something similar to what we did with the superintendent evaluation. Only thing I would, I'm not too sure about it right now, but I maybe might request that it be done in an open meeting, because superintendent evaluation was done in a closed meeting, I believe, right? So maybe something that the community can be aware of and see, that we are working very well.
And it's different, there are some boundaries and guidelines around employee evaluation. And so our superintendent evaluation is really a conversation around our employee. And so there are processes and structures that we follow as it relates to that. So done in an open meeting format, okay? And it's important to note that every meeting that we do as a board is recorded in some way.
Absolutely. Okay. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Other suggestions? Benita?
As I think about just a board evaluation, it may also be important to that we're all on the same page with the district's roadmap or goal. As you continue to ladder up to that, does it make sense to have a tier from that, but just kind of think about that? I absolutely like the process that's similar to the superintendent evaluation process, maybe having questions already or some questions you can react to. I like when you say, what would you like to see? Ensuring that every voice is heard, that will be extremely important. So at some point you talk about those things that have really worked well, but you also be very open to talk about roadblocks that has been in the way for you. You also talk about how do, if we think about continuous improvement, and I heard Dr. Flansburgh talk about this, so as I think about the board itself, what does feedback look like? I think we do a great job to have a mentor, for a person to be assigned to a mentor on the board, but if those things are not working, but just how do we continuously have open dialogue and feedback given on a regular basis, that it doesn't feel like an event, but it's just a part of conversation?
Cheryl?
So I would agree with the things that have been said. I think having a facilitator that can ask questions, or like Heidi had said, I think having something to read or something to start with that we can think about ahead of time and then have conversations, open conversations with each other so that we can get to know each other really well, understand where we're coming from, have that trust building built in, and make sure that we have shared expectations about, you know, the board as an institution and how it helps our district move forward. How well do we work together? Are we, you know, using our committee structure effectively and efficiently, and, you know, our relationships with different administrators and things like that? Do we all view that in the same way? If we're coming from the same page, that certainly helps us be a highly functioning organization working together.
All right, thank you. Sheila?
I don't really have anything to add. I feel like the suggestions made so far have all been good ones, and I'm fairly new, and I don't know if you guys have been through this process before. I went through the superintendent evaluation, and I did feel that having that structure worked really well. So again, I'm just going to echo what everyone else has said.
Right. Heidi?
Okay, there's one more thing that I want to add that I'm not excited to add, but we're losing a lot of expertise in 3 of our finest members, I would say. And part of what I'm hoping to get out of this self-evaluation is kind of the passing of the baton. I want to know what you felt like you didn't get to see through, or what you envision for the district, or, just I want to hear from you and learn from what you thought was your greatest accomplishment or your greatest mistake, or, just to learn from your experience and not just kind of let that go. I want to harness all of it.
Sorry, writing. Anything else?
If I could add one more thing too, Heidi, when you said that, it made me think about process honoring. Like if there was something that we could, so each committee, you may have a different process of how you show up in your committee and what the work is and how you put that together. And you may have just been doing that because you've been doing that, but it would be great if whatever the standing committees are, if they are kind of like given process to what it is, what the committee is, and what you go about doing, because sometimes that's hard to follow. And maybe, because I'll speak for me, I've been on the board now for 8 years, that maybe I was just doing that way because that's just the way it was being done. But when you start having new voices that come into you want to set them up for success and ensure that they feel like they can be successful. And to do that, you may need to have a written process and what that looks like.
That's fantastic. From the layers. So this is lovely, and I want to throw out some ideas that we had that I think integrates a number of things that you've talked about. One of the things, so I'm wondering about one, as we look to self-evaluate ourselves, looking at sort of 3 pillars. One being our board standard operating procedures. So the document that we said that we aligned to at the start of the year at our organization meeting that says that this is what we do. The second would be the MSBA, 7 pillars of a board member and network. And then 3 would be alignment for our strategic roadmap. So as we look to develop our evaluation processes and questions, those would be the 3 documents that we might build this process off from. Is that, we're not voting at all. I'm seeing some head nods. And so does that seem amenable to the group in a process? Okay, second of all, the work of a facilitator. So we've done some work as a board over this past year, and we've had a facilitator come in to help us to lead that work that has a strong experience with our with our roadmap, right? Our facilitator helped us develop our new roadmap, experience working with MSBA, as well as a familiarity with our standard operating procedures. And so I think that we would invite that same facilitator back in to help us to do this process as people identified the facilitator. Does that make sense? Yes. Okay. 3, Sure.
Madam Chair, you mentioned the 7 pillars of MSBA. If I'm not mistaken, MSBA also has somebody that they can provide for self-evaluation for the board.
Right.
Is that a possibility?
Indeed. There is someone, and I'll tell you the thinking behind that, and we can certainly have a conversation. We did the MSBA evaluation in the past, and that is really helpful. The process that we did, it was the strict MSBA process. We filled that out and we went through that because our goal of this evaluation, we think that we've talked about, is to build on the work that we've done in training and our specific roadmap and integrate MSBA and look to lay a foundation and a setting for board development moving forward. The thought was that maybe we would use someone that can help us and has worked in alignment with MSBA, but could accomplish more of what our goals, as opposed to that singular focus. Does that feel okay? Yeah, Linda.
Well, and I think having somebody to facilitate that knows the board is helpful. I mean, they just has some background and so on, rather than somebody who's coming in and hasn't really been acquainted or knows the board.
Okay. I hear, we talked a little bit about, starting with Heidi, we should have a document to work from, and other people thinking that the SurveyMonkey option worked well, as we, and that is where we have some questions that we all respond to. All of those inputs are compiled together, then we're able to look and review and evaluate it through that input and work from there. So that seems like the method and modality. Does that seem amenable to everyone? I would invite, I think our facilitator will be pretty active in helping us to understand the questions and cover a good grounding of this board roadmap and the pillars and our standard operating procedures. So I think that that can happen. At the same time, I guess I would invite, if board members have specific big ideas about questions to ask or areas to cover. Cheryl, you listed a few in your feedback, but if there are specific things or questions that board members have, I would invite you, maybe starting now to think about those and send an email. You can send me an email. I can at least be the keeper of this process to begin with. Milland.
Hear you correctly, you are asking us or inviting us to send you questions that could form a part of that survey?
Correct.
Because my question would have been, if you had not mentioned that, are we going to use the same survey formats, the same survey questions that we used for the superintendent evaluation? And that would not make sense, right?
No, indeed not. We are not going to use the same questions for the superintendent evaluation, and I am saying that, I think we're going to leave it to our facilitator, who has some ideas, to probably develop the final questions and the things that are there. The process would be the same. But I think if board members, I think it's really helpful insight if board members are like, gosh, I really hope a question is, or I'm wondering a question about this or that. It would be a way for our facilitator to either frame a question that could broaden that in, or make sure to have that on his radar about what is helpful, or what the board is thinking about and what is there. So if you have ideas or suggestions around that, thinking of those 3 buckets, if you want to submit those. Does that make sense? Milland?
You spoke too fast for me to even write down everything. So I wrote down SOP, then I wrote down MSBA 7 pillars. What was the third one, Madam
The
Chair?
roadmap.
Roadmap. Okay, thank
Our
you.
district roadmap.
Thank you.
Next, the timeline. So we're pretty ambitious about this process, right? And so we've come to this today. And then I think the goal would be to potentially have, before that, I was in conversation with our facilitator today, and one of the things that we talked a lot about is cadence, right? So we're on the heels of our superintendent evaluation. We're just starting the year. We have an election happening, we have our organizational meeting happening, we have onboarding, and we have capturing and farewells. So we have a lot on our plate, and this feels important and urgent as for all those reasons that I just mentioned. And so I think we want to be mindful. The goal of this evaluation would in fact be to probably outline a process or some things that then future boards can build on, right? I mean, one of the benefits of the MSBA process is that you take the same evaluation process 3 years in a row and you measure your growth, or a number of years in a row, and you measure your growth against that. And so there is an intention that this is helping us to lay a framework that we can use moving forward by building a foundation upon our board that has a lot of experience in moving that forward. So in that cadence and just important things, we want to kind of keep it moving without overwhelming anyone. And so the goal would probably be, and we can have an offline conversation about, but some target dates that we thought about were November 14th or 15th, or potentially the 20th, which is the week of Thanksgiving, which could be off the radar for some if you're traveling. But the 14th, 15th, or the 20th, it would be the hope of when we would do that. And what that would mean is that SurveyMonkey, like we do for the superintendent evaluation, would need to come out kind of in the next 2 weeks so that we would all have a period of time to do that. So specific dates we can talk about offline. We don't need to take time with that. But does that feel like an okay cadence? And then that would then mean a couple weeks later, we would have an organizational meeting in a couple weeks, and so we would sort of build on. Okay, so that is the process that we're thinking about. I do hear, Benita, your statement and feedback. This also feels layered, right? Like this is our board self-evaluation, and I think your final comment was really, really important too, which is also how are we capturing systems and structures and things from this current board? In some years, we've done a really good job of capturing the work of the committee as we look to the committee moving forward, and in some years, our committees have just kind of rolled forward, and so we haven't as much. I hear your feedback saying that then the second piece is having some intentional focus in our committee work around documenting some of that for our new board. So, and that is something, just FYI, that committees should be doing in November. So we should be working on that because that will happen because we'll want to have that in preparation for the December organizational meeting. So in terms of moving this forward, as I've sort of started the process with our facilitator, and I think we'll look for a member of the superintendent evaluation committee to be a part of sort of this planning process with our facilitator, and then our facilitator will move it forward. Does that seem reasonable? Okay, good. Okay. Any final comments or suggestions around this process or this grand adventure that we are about to embark upon?
Have we ever done a board evaluation? I know, not in the 8 years.
Yeah, you did. We did. Yep, we did. We did. We had a good one. We did one during, we did one. It probably was 2019. It was the end of 2018 or 2019. We did the MSBA evaluation. And our MSBA friend came and helped to facilitate that. So yeah, we did do that.
But I agree with you. It felt a little disconnect because it wasn't like this seating.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
It was super helpful. We love the work of MSBA, and they do really great stuff. And there's some, and so this is building on that and moving us forward.
Okay.
All right. Anything else? Any questions or things or feedback that you have afterwards? I guess I'm going to say one more thing about this really fast. The intent of this, we govern as a board. We are all certainly sit in our spot of we are each one of 7. And each of us on our own is not, that we work as a body. And so the focus of this evaluation will be on our functioning as a group together. I think there's certainly going to be opportunities for each one of us to reflect individually on the work that we do. I think we could invite one another to have conversations with mentors and with colleagues and with coworkers around things that we're doing. But the purpose of this evaluation is an evaluation of our group as a board and the work of the board, not of individual board members. And we can do that process. So as we are one of 7 and work as 7, we will evaluate as 7. Okay. Any other comments? Okay. That concludes our agenda for Monday, October 23rd, 2023. It is 5:47, and our work session is adjourned.